by leaving a comment below. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy the story, everyone. The rain had been falling for hours. Each drop echoed like a ticking clock, as if the sky itself knew that Sophia's life was about to be stolen from her. Inside the dimly lit car, her hands trembled in her lap. The silk fabric of her dress, chosen by someone else, paid for by someone else, felt foreign against her skin. She didn't belong in it. She didn't belong in this car. But most of all, she didn't belong in the fate that had just been sold in her name. She was 25, a virgin, and her parents had just handed her over to a man known not for love, but for fear. Nathaniel Blackwood. The name was heavy, legendary. In whispered circles of wealth and power, it meant control, revenge, precision. No one crossed him. No one questioned him. He didn't give interviews, didn't smile in photos. And now, for a price her family would never speak of aloud, he would be her husband. Or rather, her sentence. Her mother sat beside her in silence, eyes fixed forward, avoiding the tremor in Sophia's breath. Her father had stayed behind. He couldn't even face what he had done. Or maybe he had simply accepted it as the cost of survival. "You must obey him," her mother said suddenly, her voice flat, rehearsed. "He saved your father's legacy. This is what's best for all of us." Sophia turned her head slowly. Her voice didn't rise, didn't crack, but her eyes did what words never could. "Then why does it feel like I'm being buried alive?" Her mother didn't answer. The gates of Blackwood Estate rose out of the fog, like the entrance to another world. Grand, dark, unwelcoming. Two security guards opened the wrought iron gates slowly, and the car passed through with quiet finality. Behind them, the gates closed again. No turning back. The mansion appeared in the distance. Stone, glass, towering structures kissed by gray mist. It was breathtaking and terrifying all at once. The estate was surrounded by vineyards stretching endlessly in every direction, isolating it as if by design. Sophia stepped out of the car on shaky legs. The moment her heels touched the stone path, the front doors opened. He was already waiting. Nathaniel Blackwood stood tall and still, a dark figure framed by the chandelier's glow behind him. Black tailored suit, hands clasped in front of him. No smile, no greeting. Just eyes, piercing, unreadable, locked on her, as if she were a puzzle he had no interest in solving. Sophia had imagined this moment 1,000 different ways. Maybe he would offer his hand. Maybe he would look surprised, curious, indifferent. But he didn't move. He didn't speak. He just evaluated her as if she were merchandise. A contract signed, a possession delivered. The butler stepped forward and took her small suitcase. Her mother placed a final cold kiss on Sophia's cheek and whispered, "Make this work." Then she was gone, and Sophia was alone. She crossed the threshold of the house with her spine held high because, even if they had sold her, even if her heart was bruised and betrayed, they couldn't take her will. Not completely. Nathaniel closed the door behind her with a soft, deliberate click. "You're late," he said, his voice low, smooth, yet cold. The agreement said 6. Sophia turned toward him slowly. "You'll have to learn, I don't always follow agreements." Something flickered behind his eyes. Not amusement, not anger, something like interest. He stepped closer. She didn't back away. There was a scent about him, something clean and sharp, like cedarwood and winter wind. His presence filled the room like a storm about to burst. Everything in her wanted to recoil. But still, she stood her ground. She wouldn't give him that. "Your room is upstairs," he said, his voice like metal wrapped in silk. "You'll sleep there. I expect silence, discretion, and no questions about my past." She blinked once. "So that's the marriage. Silence and rules." He looked at her, unmoved. "This isn't a marriage. This is an agreement." Sophia's jaw tightened. "And what did you pay for in this agreement, Mr. Blackwood?" He studied her again, this time longer. "To have something that was taken from me." She didn't understand what he meant. Not yet. But the heaviness in the room was suffocating, as if ghosts walked beside them, as if his pain had become furniture. He turned away. "Margaret will show you to your room. Dinner is at 8. Do not be late again." And with that, he disappeared into the hall as quietly as he had appeared. The maid, Margaret, kind eyes, middle-aged, quiet, led Sophia through the halls. The interior was as grand as the outside, yet cold. No family photos, no laughter in the walls, just marble, silence, and windows too clean to feel human. They reached a room with a carved wooden door. "This will be yours," Margaret whispered. "You'll be safe here." Sophia gave her a sideways glance. Safe? Margaret hesitated, then quietly said, "He's not cruel, not if you don't touch the past." But how could Sophia live in a house built on secrets and not be tempted by the past? Inside the room, she finally allowed herself to breathe, a deep, broken inhale that carried the weight of everything she couldn't say. She walked to the window. Vineyards stretched beyond the horizon. Beauty, yes, but also solitude. Imprisonment dressed in elegance. She placed her hand on the glass. What had her life become? Sold, delivered, forgotten, and yet something in her whispered that this was not the end, that Nathaniel Blackwood, this man of ice and command, was not as untouched by pain as he pretended, and perhaps, just perhaps, he hadn't expected her, not Sophia, but somewhere in the depths of that house, something was watching, waiting, and her arrival had awakened what even Nathaniel had buried too deep to name. The morning after her arrival, Sophia woke up to silence, not the gentle kind filled with birdsong or the breeze, but the kind that presses against your chest like a weight. The room was too perfect. Ivory curtains fluttered gently with the wind from the open window, and the scent of fresh linen lingered in the air like a memory she hadn't lived. For a moment, she forgot where she was until she sat up and remembered everything. She stood barefoot on the cold marble floor and moved toward the window. Outside, the vineyard stretched out like a painting, neat rows of green vines rolling over soft hills, kissed by mist and sunlight. But despite the beauty, there was something eerie about it all, as if even the wind obeyed Nathaniel Blackwood. A soft knock interrupted the silence. It was Margaret again, holding a tray with toast, black coffee, and what looked like unsweetened fruit. "He likes breakfast simple," she said gently. "He assumes others should, too." Sophia offered a faint smile. "Does he always assume things for people?" Margaret hesitated before placing the tray on the table near the window. "He assumes no one ever stays." That answer settled into Sophia's bones like ice. She ate slowly, her stomach turning with every bite, not because of the food, but because of the feeling that she'd been dropped into a life surrounded by invisible walls. Every choice had already been made for her. Her clothes were selected, her food predetermined, her silence expected. After changing into a modest cream dress, she wandered through the halls, letting her fingers brush against the cold, lifeless surfaces. The house was vast, endless corridors, high ceilings, and echoes that seemed to follow her. There were no paintings of family, no sound of footsteps except for her own, and no warmth beyond what the sunlight forced through the tall windows. She passed a ballroom with its grand chandelier still and untouched, a gallery with furniture covered in white sheets, and a garden room with dying orchids in glass vases. It was as if the house had been frozen in time the day something or someone was lost. In the library, her eyes lingered on the titles lining the walls, first editions, dusty leather spines, untouched for years. One book was lying open on the desk. She walked closer and noticed that the page had been carefully folded down. "Wuthering Heights," the underlined line read, "Whatever our souls are made of, his and mine are the same." She stared at the sentence for a long time, and then his voice, low and near, "You read Bronte?" She turned sharply. Nathaniel stood at the doorframe, hands in his pockets, shirt sleeves rolled up, not expecting an answer. "I studied literature before my family lost everything," Sophia replied calmly. "But I always came back to this one." "Because you're a romantic?" he asked, expression unreadable. "No," she said, "because I believe in ghosts." There was a pause, his gaze sharpened, like she'd touched on something unspoken. He stepped into the room, his presence making the walls feel closer. "Ghosts," he repeated. "What do you think haunts this place?" She didn't flinch. "Whatever made you stop living in it," something in him stilled. She expected him to dismiss her, to throw back one of his cruel, guarded remarks. But he didn't. He just looked at her, long and silent, as if for the first time she wasn't just a pawn in his game. Then, as quickly as he had come, he stepped away from the desk. "I've arranged a wardrobe for you," he said over his shoulder. "Don't change it. I dislike surprises." She almost laughed. "And I dislike being dressed by strangers." He stopped, turned, "Then don't be a stranger." And with that, he walked away. Sophia stood there, heart pounding, not because of his words, but because of what she saw when he turned. There was something tired in his posture, something human, a crack in the mask. She moved deeper into the house after he left, feeling watched even when alone. In the western wing, she found a set of double doors that led to a greenhouse filled with wild vines and broken glass. No one had stepped foot there in years. She pushed the door open and walked inside. The scent of damp earth and wilted petals surrounded her like memories. On a bench sat a cracked ceramic pot. Inside it, a single white lily still bloomed. It looked out of place, alive in a room full of loss. She didn't know why, but she reached out and gently touched the petal. "Don't go there alone." His voice again, closer this time. Sophia turned and found Nathaniel watching her from the doorway. His jaw was clenched, but there was something deeper in his eyes. "Not anger, fear." "Why?" she asked softly. "What happened here?" He stepped forward slowly. This was Amelia's garden. Sophia didn't move. "Amelia." His voice grew colder. "You'll learn to stay away from that name." And just like that, the ghost had a name. Sophia stepped back out into the hall, heart racing, pulse thumping. Every word, every glance, every silence between them seemed loaded with more than what was spoken. That night, she dined with him for the first time. The long dining table could have seated 20, but they sat at opposite ends, like strangers in a palace. He poured the wine himself. Didn't ask what she liked. Didn't offer a toast. Just silence and silverware against porcelain. She met his gaze once across the length of the table. He didn't look away. Neither did she. She thought of that quote again. His and mine are the same, and wondered what part of him was already inside her. What piece of her had been pulled into his world without her permission. After dinner, she walked alone through the dim halls to her room. Margaret had placed a new nightgown on the bed. Elegant, ivory, too delicate for sleep. She folded it back neatly and sat at the edge of the mattress. Outside, the wind whispered through the vines. Inside, something was shifting. He wasn't what she expected, but then again, neither was she. And this mansion wasn't just a home. It was a vault of secrets, and she had just stepped inside. The clock in the hallway struck 10. Its chimes echoed through the long corridors of Blackwood Estate, slow and deliberate, as if announcing something more than the hour, something inevitable. Sophia stood before the mirror in her room, her fingers hesitating on the delicate straps of the nightgown her mother had folded into her suitcase. It was pale pink silk, modest, but revealing just enough to make her stomach tighten with unease. The fabric still carried the scent of home, of betrayal. She could hear her own breath. It was shallow, controlled. She hated that she felt afraid. She hated even more that he would expect it. Still, she slipped it over her skin with slow precision, as if dressing for a battle she hadn't agreed to fight. Her bare feet touched the cold floor. She straightened her spine and walked toward the door, then paused. The silence outside was thick. A choice lingered. Lock the door and stay safely invisible, or face the man who had bought her future and now demanded her presence in his world. She opened it. The hallway was dark, lit only by the moonlight spilling through the tall windows. Shadows moved across the walls like silent spectators. Her bedroom was on the east wing. His was at the end of the same corridor. One shared hallway. One shared night. She walked slowly, each step echoing against the marble like a question she couldn't yet answer. When she reached the double doors at the end, she stopped. They were already open. Inside, the room was vast and masculine. Dark wood, charcoal gray linen, and a fireplace lit just enough to cast a faint glow across the space. The air smelled of firewood, amber, and something unmistakably him. Nathaniel stood at the window, facing away, a glass of scotch in his hand. He didn't move when she entered. "You're punctual tonight," he said without turning. "I didn't know I had a choice." At that, he turned, and for the first time, he looked at her, not just glanced, not scanned, but looked. His eyes moved over the curve of her collarbone, the tremble in her breath, the way her fingers curled subtly around the silk hem of her nightgown, but his face remained unreadable, calm, controlled. "You can sleep here," he said, gesturing toward the bed. "On the left side. I won't touch you." Her voice was low, steady. "That implies you think I'm afraid of being touched." He raised a brow, walked past her slowly, placing the glass down on the table beside the bed, his presence brushing against her like static. "No," he murmured. "It implies I'm not interested in touching someone who was given to me like a debt to collect." Her jaw tightened. "I wasn't given. I was sold." He turned to face her again. "And you agreed?" She didn't blink. "No, but I wasn't asked." For the first time, something in his expression cracked, a twitch, a flicker of discomfort. She couldn't tell if it was guilt or something darker. Sophia walked to the far side of the room, not waiting for his permission. She pulled back the covers on the left side of the bed and slid in. Keeping the sheet wrapped tight around her frame, she could feel his gaze on her, heavy, assessing. "I'm not a ghost," she said quietly, her back to him. "I didn't say you were. Then stop treating me like one." A pause. Then the sound of his footsteps as he walked to the dresser and removed his watch, his cufflinks. Every movement was deliberate, restrained, as if rehearsed 1,000 times. He didn't speak again until the room was silent once more. "You're bold," he said. "For someone who doesn't belong here." She turned her head slightly. "Maybe I do belong here. Maybe I'm exactly the kind of storm this place needs." A long breath escaped his lips, half a sigh, half a warning. Then he climbed into the bed beside her, but kept his body far away. A wall of unsaid things lay between them. Neither of them slept. Not really. Sophia stared at the ceiling, her mind racing with images of her old life. Her room back home. Her father's hands shaking as he signed the papers. Her mother's voice telling her to obey. She wondered if Nathaniel could hear her thoughts. If he knew she wasn't afraid of him, only of becoming numb. Sometime past midnight, she shifted slightly. His voice, sudden in the dark, startled her. "You're still awake. So are you." "I don't sleep much." "Because of guilt?" she asked. Careful, precise. He was quiet for a moment too long. "No, because the silence gets too loud." The honesty of it cut deeper than she expected. She turned on her side, facing his back. He hadn't touched her, hadn't even come close, but she could feel him, his anger, his sadness, his control, and something beneath it all that frightened her more than rage ever could. Loneliness. "You don't scare me, Nathaniel," she said, barely above a whisper. He didn't move. "You should," was all he answered. But the way he said it, almost like a man trying to convince himself. In the morning, he was gone. The sheets were cold where he had lain. A glass of untouched water sat on the bedside table. The fire had gone out during the night. Sophia sat up slowly, her hair tousled, her body wrapped in stillness. She hadn't lost anything, but something had shifted. She had stepped into his domain, not as a victim, but as a force, quiet, steady, alive. And for the first time, she felt that Nathaniel Blackwood didn't know what to do with her. He was used to control, to silence, to obedience. But now, under the same roof, under the same sheets, there was a woman who looked him in the eye, spoke without fear, and refused to be broken quietly, and that perhaps was more dangerous than love. The sun was unusually bold that afternoon, spilling over the hills and setting the Blackwood estate aglow. The vineyard shimmered like gold silk, and even the austere stone of the mansion looked softer beneath the light. But inside, everything remained silent, too silent. Sophia stood in front of her closet, scanning the rows of clothes carefully selected by someone other than her. Silk blouses, neutral dresses, flats with no personality. It was all perfectly polite, perfectly inoffensive, perfectly submissive. And she was done with that. With her jaw set, she reached to the back of the closet and found it, something she hadn't worn in years. A red bikini tucked in a side pocket of her old suitcase. It was the kind of red that made a statement, not vulgar, not loud, just fearless, exactly what she needed to feel again. She changed without hesitation, pulled a linen robe over it, and made her way toward the outdoor pool. The estate's western wing opened into a stone terrace, where the private pool lay like a hidden oasis, long, rectangular, perfectly still. No one used it. She had noticed it every day from the window, untouched, like the rest of the house. Beautiful, but frozen. Not today. She walked out into the sunlight, untied her robe, and let it fall gently onto the lounge chair. The warm air touched her skin like a quiet affirmation. Her body didn't tremble this time. She didn't care if someone saw. In fact, she hoped he would. Sophia lay down, sunglasses over her eyes, head tilted toward the sun, and waited, not for him necessarily, but for herself. The woman who'd been buried beneath shame and silence. She let the light sink into her, let the wind brush against her hair. It felt like the first honest moment she'd had since arriving. For once, she wasn't hiding, and that was precisely when she heard footsteps, slow, controlled, heavy. Nathaniel's voice came from behind her, low and sharp like a blade. "Is this some sort of performance?" She didn't flinch, didn't even turn her head. "I'm enjoying the sun, unless that's prohibited too." His footsteps stopped beside her. "Don't pretend this is innocent," he said, voice tighter now. "You knew I'd see you." She removed her sunglasses and finally looked up at him, eyes calm, lips soft but firm. "And if I did, what exactly are you accusing me of? Wearing a swimsuit on my own property?" His jaw flexed. He was still in his usual attire, tailored shirt, sleeves rolled, dark trousers, but the open collar revealed a trace of tension at his throat. "This isn't your property," he said coldly. "No," she replied. "It's my prison, but at least today, I choose how to decorate the cell." The sun glinted off the water between them. A silence fell, a thick, electric silence that felt like a prelude to thunder. He stepped closer. His shadow fell over her, but she didn't move. She let him look, let him struggle with what he saw. "You think you're in control now?" he asked, voice low. "I think control is an illusion," she answered. "And you're clinging to it like a man drowning." Something cracked in his expression. A muscle in his cheek twitched. His eyes dropped momentarily to the curve of her waist, then back to her face. And for once, he didn't hide it. Desire. Not polite, civilized desire, but raw, unwanted, uncontrolled, and it infuriated him. "You're playing a dangerous game," he said, stepping even closer. The space between them now thin as breath. Sophia stood slowly. Her hair fell over one shoulder, and the red of her bikini burned against the pale blue sky behind her. She didn't retreat. She met him head on. "I didn't come here to play," she whispered. Nathaniel's eyes darkened. For a moment, his hand lifted just slightly, as if he were about to touch her arm, her face, her hair, but he stopped himself, barely. Instead, he leaned in, his voice brushing her ear. "You think this makes you powerful? Tempting the man who owns this house?" She turned her head slightly, her lips just inches from his. "No, I think refusing to be invisible makes me free." And then, without warning, she stepped back, not out of fear, but choice. She picked up her robe, wrapped it around her shoulders, and began walking back toward the mansion, her steps quiet, unhurried. But just before entering the house, she stopped, turned. "By the way," she said over her shoulder, "you don't own everything here." Nathaniel didn't respond, couldn't, because for the first time since she arrived, he was the one left standing alone, speechless, breathless, and no longer certain who held the power between them. Inside, Sophia leaned against the hallway wall, her heart pounding wildly in her chest, not from fear, from the storm she had just stirred and the fire it had lit. She wasn't naive. She knew the man she had just confronted could destroy her with a word. But somehow that no longer scared her. What scared her now was how alive she had felt under his gaze, and how much she wanted him to look again. Outside, Nathaniel remained still by the pool, his fists clenched, his thoughts spiraled. He had brought her here to punish her, to haunt her, to remind himself that the blood of her family had taken everything from him. But now she walked with fire in her eyes and rebellion on her skin. She didn't flinch, didn't obey. She challenged him at every turn, and he couldn't stop looking at her, couldn't stop thinking about what it would feel like to give in, just once. But desire was dangerous, especially when it started to burn where revenge had once lived, and the fire was spreading. The rain came without warning. One moment, the afternoon was golden and still. The next, the sky opened with a low grumble and began to weep over the estate. Thick drops tapped against the windows like soft knocks on a door no one wanted to open. Sophia stood in the hallway near the grand staircase, watching the storm through the tall glass panes. The vineyard blurred into silver and ash. Somewhere deep in the mansion, a piano note echoed faintly and then stopped, like someone had touched it by accident and remembered too late that music wasn't welcome here. The house felt heavier during the rain, as if it remembered something. Someone. She wandered the halls without a destination. Her fingers traced the grooves of the wooden banisters, then the carved door frames, then the edges of paintings that hung like memories no one talked about. They were mostly landscapes, still, cold, impersonal. Not a single face among them, until the library. It was the only room that felt alive. The door creaked open, and Sophia stepped inside. The scent of leather, paper, and time wrapped around her. Shadows stretched along the shelves like secrets, keeping each other company. She'd been here before briefly, but now she walked deeper. Near the far wall, a small alcove caught her attention, lined with antique volumes and bound journals. She pulled one from the shelf and opened it, revealing pages filled with elegant, slanted handwriting. Notes about wine cultivation, business, legal formulas, all meticulous, all cold. She slid it back into place. Then, on the lowest shelf, something else. A wooden box tucked between books. Curious. Sophia pulled it free. Inside, Polaroid photographs. Old, faded, and worn at the edges. A woman in her 22nd, standing barefoot in the garden, dark hair, a bright smile, and eyes that sparkled with wildness. In another photo, the same woman laughed with a man whose face had been torn from the image. One photograph, however, remained untouched. The woman stood in front of the fountain just outside the greenhouse. Holding a white lily, she looked radiant. On the back of the photo, a name written in delicate ink. Amelia Voss. Sophia's breath caught. The name felt like thunder, even in silence. She stared at it for a long time. Why was this hidden? Why did Nathaniel flinch when she had stepped into that part of the house? Why did no one speak of this woman? She didn't hear the door open, didn't sense his presence until his voice cracked the stillness behind her like a whip. Put that back. Sophia froze. She turned slowly to find Nathaniel in the doorway. He was soaked from the rain, his shirt clinging to his skin, hair damp, jaw clenched. He looked different, disheveled, exposed. "You're not supposed to be in here," he said, stepping forward. She didn't move. Why? Because this is where the truth lives. He stopped. His eyes locked on hers, a storm behind them that rivaled the one outside. "That name," he said slowly, "is never to be spoken in this house." Sophia held the photo tighter. Who was she? His voice was low. "Put it back." But she didn't. Was she your wife? Silence. Your lover? Nothing. Sophia stepped forward now, her voice rising slightly, trembling not with fear but with something else. An ache. A need to understand why this man, this mansion, this life, was so deeply buried in shadows. "She had your eyes," she whispered. "The same sadness." Nathaniel reached out and snatched the photo from her hand, crushing it between his fingers. "I told you, I want to know what I've been dragged into," Sophia snapped. "You brought me here? You married me without love, without choice, without meaning. And yet, there's meaning everywhere I look. Every silence in this house is screaming her name." He turned away, jaw tight, breathing hard. Rainwater dripped from his hair down his temple. He ran a hand through it as if trying to shake something loose. Grief, rage, memory. "She died," he said finally. The words were simple, but they carried a weight that bent the air between them. "She was in a car," he continued, eyes locked on the fireplace now. "A rainy night, curved road. She was on her way to meet me. The other driver ran a red light." Sophia's voice dropped, and Nathaniel's shoulders tensed. "It was your parents' car." A silence so thick fell that Sophia felt like it might smother her. She couldn't speak, couldn't move. He turned to her again, and his voice no longer held venom, but something worse. Hollow grief. They survived. She didn't. The crack in his soul had a name now. Amelia. "I loved her," he said, "and I buried her with everything I believed in." Sophia stepped back, heart pounding. The room swayed slightly. "So that's why I'm here," she whispered. "That's why you chose me." He nodded once, slowly. This wasn't about marriage or business or even power. His eyes met hers. It was punishment. She swallowed hard. For the first time in her life, she didn't know if her legs would hold her. "I didn't even know her," she said, broken. "I wasn't driving the car. But you carry their name," he said coldly. "You carry their blood." The cruelty was sharp. With Benetit, a tremor, he didn't want to hate her. He just didn't know how to stop. Sophia turned toward the door, but before leaving, she looked back, voice soft, stripped. Then, "Hate them, blame them, destroy everything they built, but don't put her death on my skin." And she walked out, not quickly, not defeated, but slow, heavy, and alive with something new, understanding, and fury. Inside the library, Nathaniel remained alone. He stared at the crushed photo in his hand. His fingers opened. The image fluttered to the floor like a fallen leaf. Amelia's smile stared up at him from the ruins of the past. But now, another woman's voice echoed in the room, a voice that didn't tremble, a voice that defied him, and for the first time in years, his heart didn't know who it belonged to. Outside, the storm began to clear, but inside them both, the storm was just beginning. The day after the storm, the sky was impossibly blue, too clean, too bright. It felt wrong. Sophia stood on the balcony just outside her room, arms wrapped around herself, staring at the vineyard that now looked like another planet. She hadn't spoken to Nathaniel since the confrontation in the library, but his words, "It was punishment," echoed louder than anything he could have screamed. Her chest felt hollow, not because of guilt, but because she'd seen it now, seen the truth. She had been a placeholder for grief, a symbol for something broken, and she couldn't unsee it. That afternoon, Margaret entered the room with cautious steps. "Mr. Blackwood asked to see you in the study." she said quietly. Sophia didn't respond right away. She just nodded once and walked barefoot down the hall. The study was dim. Heavy curtains blocked most of the light. Books lined the walls, and a single decanter of whiskey sat untouched on the mahogany desk. Nathaniel was standing by the window, as if he'd been rehearsing this moment for hours. He didn't turn when she entered. "I know you hate me," he said. She stayed silent. "I don't expect you to understand," he added. "I don't need to understand," Sophia replied, voice even, "but I deserve the truth." He finally turned, and in his eyes, less fire, more ash. "I didn't plan to marry anyone," he began. "Not again. Not after Amelia." He sat down slowly, folding his hands as if to keep them from shaking. "After the accident, I wanted revenge, not on the world, on something tangible, on someone I could look in the eye." He looked at her now. "You." She swallowed hard. "I wasn't there that night," she said. "I didn't even know it happened until years later." "I know," he admitted. "That's what makes it worse." Sophia blinked, confused. "Worse? You're innocent entirely, and I still wanted to punish you." The honesty knocked the breath out of her. She sat in the chair across from him, knees tight, hands clasped. "Then why do it?" she asked, eyes fixed on his. "Why marry me?" His voice broke slightly. "Because I wanted your family to owe me. I wanted them to look at you and see the price they paid for their sins. I wanted your father to hand you over like a pawn." "And he did," Sophia whispered, the bitterness sharp. Nathaniel leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "But I didn't expect you," he said. "Not the way you walked into this house. Not the way you looked at me. Not the way you didn't break." Her breath caught. "I wanted you to hate me," he continued. "It would have made it easier. But you didn't scream. You didn't beg. You just stayed." "Because I didn't come here to survive," she said. "I came here to understand." Their eyes met, and for the first time something passed between them that wasn't vengeance. It was pain. Shared pain. "You see her in me, don't you?" Sophia asked. Nathaniel nodded slowly. "Sometimes, the way you stand, the way you look at the world like it hasn't yet earned your trust." He ran a hand through his hair. "But you're not her, and that terrifies me." Sophia stood, walked to the window. Her reflection stared back at her in the glass, pale, uncertain, but still standing. "You built a prison," she said, not looking at him. "But you forgot that some people don't just sit inside cages. They start shaking the bars." He rose too. "Sophia," he began. "No," she said, turning around. Her voice was strong now. "You don't get to break people just because you were broken. You don't get to bury me in your grief." He stepped forward, stopped. "I don't want to hurt you anymore," he said. "But you already have," she replied. Softer now. Silence. A fragile, aching silence. Then she added, "You lost the woman you loved, but you don't get to choose another woman to carry your grief." Nathaniel looked down, chest rising and falling like a man drowning just beneath the surface. "I know," he said. "I just didn't know how to stop missing her until you walked in." Sophia tilted her head. "And now?" He looked up, and for the first time, he didn't hide. "I don't miss her the same way." It wasn't a declaration of love. It wasn't even forgiveness. But it was something real and terrifying. She stepped back. "I'm not her," she said. "I know. I won't save you. I know. But I won't let you destroy me either." Their eyes locked for one last second, and she left the room, not as a prisoner, but as someone who now saw everything. The man, the monster, and the boy beneath them both. Grieving, lost, and dangerously close to something else entirely. Feeling, that night, Sophia sat on the floor of her room, her back against the wall, hands trembling in her lap. She didn't cry. There were no tears left. Just the steady, quiet realization that the game had changed. She was no longer just a piece in someone else's story. She was becoming the author of her own, even if it meant tearing every page apart to rewrite the ending. Downstairs, Nathaniel poured himself a drink he wouldn't finish. He stood alone in the dark, holding a photograph he hadn't touched in years, and for the first time, he whispered her name without pain, because something else had taken root. Something terrifying. Something alive. The invitation arrived in a black envelope, thick and elegant, placed neatly on her bedside table. "Sophia Blackwood," it read. Formal, clean, cold, just like everything in this house. It was for a gala hosted by one of Nathaniel's business partners, some charitable event in Napa Valley, filled with crystal chandeliers and fake smiles, but the truth was unspoken. This wasn't just a night of appearances. It was a test. He wanted to see if she could play the role of his wife, the obedient, elegant, quiet trophy beside him, and she had every intention of attending. just not the way he expected. Sophia stood in front of the closet that evening, staring at the array of dresses chosen for her, pastel tones, conservative cuts, fabrics that whispered wealth without voice. Not one of them had teeth. She reached into the back of the wardrobe, wrapped in silk. Untouched, since before her arrival, was a dress she had hidden. Her own choice, deep crimson, backless, long slit to the thigh. The kind of dress that didn't ask for permission, the kind of dress that announced war before the first word was spoken. She wore it without shame, without hesitation. It clung to her like confidence, every step echoing across the marble like a declaration. When she descended the staircase, the entire estate seemed to stop breathing. Nathaniel stood near the base, straightening his cufflinks. The moment he looked up, his jaw locked. For a fraction of a second, something flickered in his expression, something primal, stunned, and utterly undone. His eyes dragged over her body like a man trying not to feel, but he felt it, every inch. She reached the final step. "Nu smile, nu apology. Is this appropriate?" she asked calmly, her voice silk over fire. His voice was lower, controlled. "Change." "No," Sophia said. She stepped closer, the scent of her skin, soft florals, warm skin, a hint of rebellion, wrapped around him like smoke. "You don't own my choices," she said. "Not anymore." He stared at her like he didn't recognize the woman in front of him, and maybe he didn't. She wasn't the girl who had arrived trembling with fear. She was something else now, something he had accidentally created, powerful, unforgiving, irresistible. "In the car," he said, nothing more. Neither did she. The silence between them wasn't empty. It pulsed like a second heartbeat, and when they arrived at the gala, the whispers began the moment she stepped from the vehicle. Sophia Blackwood. Red dress. Bare back. Eyes like knives wrapped in velvet. She moved through the crowd like someone who belonged there, but didn't bow to it. Nathaniel kept close, his hand at the small of her back, more of a leash than a gesture of affection. "You enjoy making scenes," he murmured near her ear. She turned slightly, lips barely moving. "You enjoy control. Tonight, we both get what we want." But what he wanted was shifting, and that terrified him. They danced once, her hand in his, their bodies near, but not touching fully. Everyone watched. No one spoke. And in that silence, their eyes said things their mouths never could. By the time they returned home, the tension had reached its breaking point. Nathaniel opened the door with more force than necessary. The sound echoed down the hall like a shot. Sophia walked past him, unhurried, heels clicking softly. He closed the door behind them. Then the explosion. "What the hell was that?" he snapped, voice low but shaking. She turned slowly. "That," she said, "was me. Not your puppet, not your shadow. Me." He stepped forward. "You think this is a game?" She didn't back down. "I think this is the first time you've ever been afraid of a woman who isn't dead." The words sliced the air. He froze, breathing hard. Then, in one swift movement, he gripped her arm, not harshly, but firmly. A silent question burned between them. "Who are you becoming?" Asterisk. Sophia didn't flinch. She leaned in slowly, her lips close to his. "You can try to strip me bare, Nathaniel, but you'll never see me kneel." And then she stepped back and unzipped the dress. It slid from her shoulders, hit the floor like a gauntlet thrown. She stood before him in lace lingerie, unashamed, spine straight, eyes burning. "I'm not afraid of your anger," she said, "but maybe you are." His chest rose and fell, his fists clenched at his sides. She thought he might shout or leave or destroy something, but he didn't. He looked at her like a man standing on the edge of a cliff, one step away from surrender, one breath from falling. Then he turned, walked away, closed the door behind him, and left her standing there, not discarded, not defeated, but powerful and unforgettable. In the hallway, Nathaniel pressed his back to the wall, fingers trembling. She had stolen the breath from his lungs. The woman he brought here to punish was now the only one who made him feel alive, and for the first time in years, he didn't know what to do with that. In her room, Sophia lay down on the bed in silence, eyes open, heart calm. She didn't win. This wasn't about winning. It was about being seen. And tonight, he had seen her, all of her, and still, she didn't break. But the most dangerous part, he didn't want her to. Not anymore. It was just past 3 in the morning. The mansion was asleep, if it ever truly slept. Outside, the moon hung low over the vineyard, casting pale light across the gravel path that wound down toward the gates. The air smelled like fog, like metal, like choices. Sophia moved through the halls like a shadow, barefoot, breath held. She'd memorized every creaking floorboard, every camera angle. Margaret had left the service door open to air out the laundry room, something she always did after midnight. Sophia had noticed, she'd remembered, and tonight, she would use it. No note, no goodbye. She didn't owe him closure, not after what he'd taken. Her pulse thundered as she slipped past the west corridor and into the lower wing. The cold tile bit into her skin, but she didn't stop. Her fingers found the latch. The lock gave with a click. She stepped into the night, free for 2 seconds. Then his voice, low, calm, but lethal. Sophia. Her heart sized. She turned slowly. Nathaniel stood a few feet behind her, barefoot, shirt half-buttoned, eyes dark. "How long were you watching?" she asked, not bothering to hide the fury in her voice. "Long enough." "Move," she said. "No." She stepped toward him. "This is over. You don't get to decide that." "I never decided any of it," she snapped. "You bought me, trapped me, used me, and now you want to stop me from leaving. What am I to you, Nathaniel? Punishment or property?" He said nothing, which was worse than shouting. "Say something," she cried, her voice cracking. He looked at her then, not like a man guarding territory, but like someone caught between fire and water. His chest rose, fell again. His hands stayed at his sides. "I don't know what you are to me anymore," he finally said, "and that scares the hell out of me." Sophia's throat tightened. She hadn't expected that. He took a step forward, slower this time. "You were supposed to be a name," he said, "a face to blame, something I could bury my rage in. But then you spoke. You stood up. You refused to bend. And I." He stopped himself. "You what?" She pushed. He searched her face, and this time there was no mask. "I started seeing you, and I can't stop." Silence wrapped around them like fog, heavy, too real. "I don't want to feel this," he whispered. "But I do." She blinked hard. "And what exactly is this?" He stepped even closer, his voice like broken glass wrapped in velvet. "I don't know if it's love or guilt or obsession, but I wake up thinking of you. I watch the door, hoping you'll come through, and when you don't, it feels like something's missing." Sophia's lips parted, but no sound came because that was the moment it broke. The wall, the armor, the cold gone, and what remained was a man, flawed, torn, terrified. She could feel his breath now, could see the way his hand trembled just slightly at his side. He was trying so hard not to reach for her, and she was trying so hard not to let him. "I don't want to be your bandage," she said, her voice barely there. "You're not," he replied. "You're my wake-up call." Her eyes searched his, and for once, he let her see everything. The pain, the loss, the fear, and beneath it all, wanting not of the body, of the soul. She took a long breath, then turned toward the open door. "I wasn't running from you," she said softly. "I was running for myself." He didn't stop her this time, but just as she reached the threshold, she paused, turned her head. "And if you want me to stay," she said without looking back, "you'll have to stop chaining me with your pain and start showing me your heart." Then she stepped out and disappeared into the night. He didn't follow, not right away. He stood in that cold hallway for a long time, his heartbeat a war in his chest because he knew she wouldn't run forever. And if he ever wanted her to return, it wouldn't be as a prisoner, but as a choice, and he wasn't ready for that yet. Out in the vineyard, Sophia sat beneath a tree as dawn began to stretch over the hills. The sky turned lavender, the vines whispered, and for the first time since arriving, she didn't feel trapped. Not by him, not by the past, but free to choose, and that was more terrifying than any locked door, because now she had the power, and he knew it. It happened just after midnight. Sophia was returning from the garden. Her hair was damp from the mist, her hands stained slightly with soil. She had gone out to clear her thoughts, to put space between her and Nathaniel, between all the words he'd left unsaid. The house was dark when she entered. Too dark. Margaret usually left the entry lights on, but tonight they were off. A hum of unease crept under her skin. She stepped into the foyer, her bare feet quiet against the marble, and called softly, "Margaret." No answer, just the ticking of the old grandfather clock and the whisper of wind through the half-cracked window. She took a few steps further when she heard it. A thud, sharp, muffled, and then a voice, male, rough, low, and not Nathaniel's. Her breath stopped. A shadow moved down the hall. Sophia's heart leapt into her throat, and without thinking, She turned and ran through the back corridor into the dining room, nearly knocking over a vase. Her chest pounded as she searched for something, anything to defend herself. The door slammed behind her. She whirled around. A man stood in the doorway, masked, tall, holding a crowbar. "Where's the safe?" he demanded. Her mouth opened, but no sound came. He stepped closer. She backed away, trembling now, every nerve on fire. I said he didn't finish because in that moment a blur of movement came from behind. Fast, brutal, precise. Nathaniel. He tackled the man to the ground, the crowbar skidding across the floor with a clang. They struggled, fists, elbows, chaos, but the intruder was stronger than he looked. He got the upper hand, grabbed Nathaniel by the collar, and slammed him into the sideboard. Sophia didn't think. She didn't scream. She moved fast. She picked up the broken glass vase beside her and slammed it into the man's head. Once, twice. He crumpled. Silence fell, jagged and surreal. Nathaniel staggered back, breathless, blood on his knuckles. Sophia stood frozen, her chest heaving, glass shards cutting into her palm. He looked at her, and something in him broke, not in anger, not in fear, but in awe. "You," he started, then stopped, eyes wide. "You saved me?" She didn't reply. She couldn't, because her whole body was trembling. Adrenaline, terror, something else. He stepped forward, took the glass from her hand, and tossed it aside. His fingers closed around her wrist, gently grounding her. "Sophia," his voice cracked. "I thought he was going to kill you," she whispered. The weight of those words landed between them like thunder. And then he kissed her. Not planned, not polite. It was violent with emotion, desperate, breathless, a collision of fear and fire. His hands framed her face like he'd been waiting years to touch her. Her lips parted beneath his instinctively. No resistance, no hesitation, only heat, only relief, only need. She kissed him back fiercely, not because she forgave him, but because in that moment she didn't want to feel anything else. The kiss deepened, turned slower, softer, like they were both realizing how long they'd been starving for something real. His forehead pressed against hers. Neither of them spoke. Their breath mixed in the air like smoke. "Sophia," he murmured, his voice barely there. "If I'd lost you." "But you didn't," she whispered. "You didn't." They stood like that for what felt like an entire lifetime, wrapped in fear, and something that didn't have a name yet. Not quite love, not yet, but something rising, something burning, something inevitable. Later, the police came. The intruder had escaped in the confusion, injured, but gone. Nathaniel made the calls, gave orders, checked the cameras. He didn't leave her side once. And Sophia, she sat on the edge of the bed in her room, still in the same dress, her fingers wrapped in bandages Margaret had applied. Her mind ran in loops, replaying everything, the glass, the blood, the kiss. He knocked on her door. She didn't answer. He entered anyway. "I should have protected you," he said quietly. "Better." She looked up. "You did." He sat beside her, not too close, but close enough that their hands touched. Barely. "I saw your face when you thought I'd die," he whispered. She closed her eyes. "I saw yours too," she replied. A beat, then another, and then, softer. "I didn't kiss you to confuse you," he said. She opened her eyes. "Then why?" He turned to her, eyes raw. "Because I didn't know how else to stop the shaking in my chest." She inhaled sharply and didn't look away. For the first time, there was no wall between them, no contract, no past, just two people who had nearly lost each other, and realized, maybe too late, that something inside them had already begun to change. The house was finally quiet, not the suffocating silence of before, but the kind that feels sacred. Sophia stood by the window in her bedroom, the moonlight wrapping around her like a shawl. Her hair was still damp from the shower, falling in loose waves down her back. The thin cotton of her nightgown clung softly to her skin. Moving with her breath, she couldn't stop thinking about the way he looked at her, not when she shattered the vase, not when she kissed him, but after the fear had passed and only rawness remained. There was something in his eyes she hadn't seen before. Not rage, not grief, but need. A quiet knock came at the door, not demanding, just there. Her heartbeat shifted. "Sophia," he said softly. She didn't answer. He pushed the door open and stood in the frame, barefoot, no jacket, shirt untucked, sleeves rolled up, his hair still damp from the rain earlier. But it was his expression that made her breath catch. He looked like a man stripped of everything but truth. She turned. Their eyes met. Neither of them moved. For a long moment, the space between them pulsed with unsaid things, like everything they tried to deny was now standing in the room too, silently demanding to be acknowledged. "I shouldn't be here," he said quietly. "Then leave," she whispered. He didn't. His eyes dropped to the floor for a moment, then back to hers. "I don't want to hurt you anymore." "Then stop holding back." That was the final thread. He crossed the room in slow, deliberate steps, stopped right in front of her. Close enough to feel her breath, he lifted his hand to her cheek, hesitant, like he wasn't sure he was allowed, but she didn't pull away. His fingers brushed her skin, and everything inside him broke. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to stop him. She didn't. Their lips met, no violence, no desperation, just heat, and the kind of longing that comes after too much time pretending it didn't exist. His hands moved to her waist, pulling her closer. She melted into him. Soft, certain. And he kissed her like she was something holy, like every piece of rage had finally burned out, and all that remained was firelight. She slid her fingers into his hair. He exhaled against her mouth, and everything else, the past, the guilt, the reasons faded. They didn't speak as he led her to the bed. No words were needed because this wasn't conquest. This wasn't apology. This was surrender. He moved slowly, reverently, like discovering her was something sacred. She let him. She pulled him closer. There were no loud moans, no theatrics, only quiet breaths, hands trembling over bare skin, her heartbeat pressed to another. Every movement was a sentence they hadn't dared speak. When he finally entered her, it wasn't about possession. It was about presence. They held each other, moved together, gave in completely, and for the first time, Nathaniel wasn't hiding. His body said what his mouth never could. "I need you." Asterisk. Not to erase the past, but to believe in something after it. Their rhythms slowed. Their lips met again and again and again until they weren't separate anymore. Just breath and skin and silence until the world outside faded, until all that remained was them. When it was over, they didn't speak. He lay beside her, chest bare, eyes open, vulnerable. Her head rested on his shoulder. His arm wrapped around her waist. The night wrapped around both of them like a secret, and for the first time, neither of them needed to be strong. They just needed to be. Later, when the moon had moved higher in the sky, she whispered, "Why did you come?" He turned his head, looked into her eyes. "Because I couldn't stop thinking, what if tonight was the last time I had the chance to show you I'm not him anymore?" She blinked slowly, a tear escaping down her cheek. "I didn't expect to feel this," she said. "Not here. Not with you." He brushed the tear away, voice barely audible. "I didn't expect to deserve it." And in that silence, in that stillness, they both knew the walls had fallen, and neither one of them wanted to rebuild them. Not now, not after this. It started with a feeling, not pain, not fear, but a quiet shift, like something inside her had changed form. Sophia sat on the edge of the bathtub, one hand resting on her stomach, the other gripping the edge of the porcelain. The morning light poured through the window, soft and golden, but it did nothing to calm the trembling in her limbs. She hadn't slept well in days. Her appetite had vanished, and for the last 3 mornings, her body had woken her up with a wave of nausea that felt like a storm. She thought it might be the stress, the aftermath of everything, the kiss, the night, the shift in how Nathaniel looked at her, but then 3 days late turned to 5, and something inside her whispered a word she hadn't dared think in years. Pregnant. She stared down at the small white box in her hand. The drugstore test sat on the marble sink. Blinking silently, one line, then another, faint, but there. She covered her mouth with her hand. Her breath caught in her throat, not because she was afraid, but because she wasn't sure what she was feeling. A sob built in her chest, not of sadness, not even of joy, but something deeper. She was carrying life. Inside this house, where everything had begun with death, something had chosen to bloom. She didn't tell him right away. Not that day. She walked through the vineyard alone for hours, her fingers brushing the vines like they were pages in a book she hadn't yet read. The wind was gentle, the sky wide, and for the first time since arriving, she felt full, not with answers, but with possibility. She spent the afternoon in the sunroom, sketching quietly. Her fingers moved without thought, shapes, curves, outlines of something that looked like a home, a real one, with color and windows open, with laughter, and a crib. When Margaret came in with tea, she paused beside her. "You're glowing," she said gently. Sophia looked up, startled. Margaret smiled softly. "You don't have to say it. I see it." Sophia lowered her eyes. I don't even know what I am to him, she whispered. And now there's this. Margaret sat beside her, placed a hand over hers. You're not what you were, she said. You never were a possession, and you're not just a symbol of his pain. Then, what am I? Margaret met her gaze. A beginning. That night, Nathaniel came home late. He looked tired, distracted, but when he saw her waiting for him by the fireplace, barefoot in a soft dress, hair loose, he stopped mid-step. Sophia. She didn't speak. She just held out her hand. He took it and sat beside her. There was a pause, long and fragile. Then she placed his palm gently over her stomach. At first, he didn't understand. His brow furrowed, his fingers stiffened. Then his body stilled completely. His eyes rose to hers. His voice was barely audible. You're. She nodded. The silence that followed wasn't cold this time. It was holy. He looked down at his hand again, as if trying to feel something already growing beneath his touch. I didn't expect this, he whispered. Neither did I. He swallowed hard. And yet, it doesn't feel wrong. Tears welled in her eyes. I was so scared to tell you, she confessed. He moved closer, took her face in his hands, and for the first time since they met, his eyes filled with tears. Sophia, I've spent years not caring if I lived or died. She pressed her forehead to his, but now you do. She finished for him. He nodded. Now I have something real to lose. His voice cracked. She held him, and in that moment, the man who once brought her here in cold calculation held her like she was the only thing anchoring him to this earth. Later that night, they lay in bed. The fire burned low. His hand never left her stomach. Her fingers traced circles over his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of a heart that was no longer just his. That's going to change everything, she whispered. I know. Are you afraid? Yes, he said, terrified. She looked up at him. But I'm not running, he added. Not from this. She smiled faintly. Neither am I. And somewhere deep in the house, where pain once echoed loudest, hope began to take root. It didn't erase the past, but it promised something better ahead, a future, a family, a reason to start again. His name would come later, but already in both their hearts, he existed, small, real, and stronger than anything either of them had planned. The house was no longer silent. It breathed now, softly, rhythmically, like something reborn. Laughter hadn't returned in echoes, not yet, but music sometimes played from the sunroom, and Margaret had begun humming while setting the table, as if the walls themselves had softened. Sophia sat near the fireplace, her hands resting over her belly, now round, full, and radiant. She was 8 months along. Her ankles swelled, her moods shifted, and yet, she had never felt more anchored to the world. Nathaniel had changed too, not loudly, not suddenly, but deeply. He no longer disappeared into his office for hours. He asked questions, listened, learned how to boil water without burning it, how to rub her back without her needing to ask, how to hold her hand when fear crept in during the night, and most of all, how to be present. Sometimes she'd catch him watching her from the doorway. His gaze wasn't hungry or proud or possessive. It was quiet, humbled, full. One afternoon, as she rested in the garden, he knelt in front of her and placed both hands gently on her belly. What do you think he'll be like? He asked. She smiled. Nothing like us, I hope. He kissed her stomach softly. Or maybe the best of both. Her throat tightened, because that was what she hadn't expected. To love him like this. Not because she'd been broken, but because he had let himself break, too. And in the ruins of who they were, they had built something neither of them knew how to name until the night Ethan came. It was storming again, like the night she arrived, but this time, the wind didn't frighten her. It began with a sharp cramp that pulled her from sleep, then another, then a flood of water and a cry in the dark. Nathaniel. He was at her side in seconds, panic barely veiled. The baby, he's coming, she said, breathless. He didn't hesitate. Called Margaret, called the doctor, held her hand as they laid her down. It was fast, fierce, terrifying, and he never left her side. She screamed, sweated, clawed at the sheets, but never once said, I can't, because she had endured worse, and survived. And now she would bring life into a world that had once felt colder than death. Nathaniel whispered to her the whole time, You're safe. You're strong. I love you. Over and over until the moment Ethan cried out. Loud, real, alive, and the house heard it. Sophia collapsed into sobs. Nathaniel held his son in trembling arms, speechless, undone. He placed the tiny body on her chest and kissed her forehead, breathless. "I've never deserved this," he whispered, and she looked at him, hair damp with sweat, eyes red from tears, and said, "But you stayed. That's how you earn it." They named him Ethan Blackwood because he came with wings they couldn't see, but could feel in every heartbeat. The days after his birth were tender, chaotic, and luminous. The once cold mansion now echoed with baby cries and lullabies, with soft laughter and late-night footsteps. Nathaniel walked the halls with Ethan cradled to his chest. He had stopped wearing armor, stopped hiding behind silence, and one morning, as Sophia sat by the window, nursing, hair a mess, robe untied, skin glowing with motherhood, he knelt in front of her, took her hand, and said quietly, "You weren't my punishment, Sophia." Her eyes filled. "You are my home." She touched his face and smiled. That night, they didn't make love. They didn't need to. They lay together in bed with Ethan in a bassinet beside them, hands intertwined, hearts steady, and for the first time since the day she had been sold, Sophia closed her eyes without fear and dreamed of beginnings, of roots, of peace. Because sometimes love doesn't arrive wrapped in light. Sometimes it is born from darkness, from the places we think cannot be healed. But even there, especially there, new life can grow. They didn't start with love. They started with fear, silence, and wounds too deep to ignore. But even in a house built on loss, a child came. And with him, forgiveness. Nathaniel didn't save Sophia. Sophia didn't heal Nathaniel. They simply chose to stay. And sometimes, that is all anyone needs. Because maybe, deep down, this story is also about us. The parts that survive, the fears we silence, and the chance to start over, even